3 weeks before our wedding, my fiancé looked me straight in the eyes and said something I'll never forget. "I deserve someone more successful than you." She smiled as she slipped off the engagement ring I'd spent 6 months saving for and dropped it onto the restaurant table. The entire place went silent. Then she stood up, walked over to a wealthy businessman waiting near the entrance, took his hand, and left with him without looking back. I sat there while strangers stared at me with pity. My own parents later told me maybe she had made the right choice. They believed I'd never become anything. What none of them knew was that I had just signed a confidential contract that would change my life forever. 6 months later, the same woman who humiliated me in public showed up at my front door in tears, begging for one last chance.
Have you ever sat at a family dinner and realized every smile around the table was fake? I did. The night my father died, my brother raised a glass and called me the family's biggest failure. Everyone laughed. My sister whispered that I had spent my whole life cleaning floors because I wasn't smart enough to do anything else. Even my aunt looked at me with pity. None of them knew the truth. They thought I was just a broke janitor who barely survived paycheck to paycheck. They had no idea I'd spent the last 6 years secretly taking care of our father while they fought over the fortune they believed was already theirs. They mocked my old pickup truck. They laughed at my secondhand clothes. They even argued about who would let me sleep in their garage after the funeral because they assumed I'd soon be homeless. What happened 48 hours later destroyed every lie they'd built their lives on. Because when the lawyer opened my father's final will, every face in that room turned white, and for the first time in my life, they needed me far more than I would ever need them. I'm Ethan, 68 years old, and this is the story of how my own family tried to erase me, only to discover that kindness is sometimes worth far more than millions of dollars.
For the next few days, I tried to convince myself I was overthinking everything. Emily still came home every evening. She still kissed me goodbye before work. She still wore the engagement ring I had spent months saving for. But something had changed. She no longer talked about our honeymoon. Whenever I brought up wedding plans, she quickly changed the subject. It felt as if our future had become an inconvenience instead of a dream. Then one Tuesday afternoon, I got a phone call from the wedding venue. The coordinator sounded confused. "Hi, Daniel. We just wanted to confirm that your fiancé requested to cancel today's final planning appointment." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? We never canceled anything." There was an awkward silence. "Oh." "She told us both of you had decided to postpone the wedding." I thanked her and hung up. Immediately, I called Emily. No answer. I texted her. No reply. An hour later, she finally responded. "We need to talk tonight." Those 5 words felt heavier than anything I'd ever read. That evening she asked me to meet her at the same restaurant where we had celebrated our engagement. I arrived 20 minutes early. I still believed there had to be some misunderstanding. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe work had become overwhelming. Maybe we simply needed to communicate better. Then Emily walked in. She wasn't alone. Standing a few feet behind her was Victor Harrison, the wealthy businessman she'd met at the conference. He didn't sit down. He simply folded his arms and watched. Emily looked at me with a cold expression I had never seen before. "I'm not going to marry you." I laughed nervously. "Very funny. I'm serious." The smile disappeared from my face. She slowly removed the engagement ring from her finger and placed it on the table. "I've realized I want a different life." I stared at the ring. It suddenly looked so small compared to everything we had planned together. "What are you talking about?" She crossed her arms. "I've spent 4 years waiting for you to become successful. You work hard, Daniel. But hard work isn't enough anymore. I want security. I want luxury. I want the life I've always dreamed about." I looked toward Victor. "So this is about him?" She didn't even deny it. "He already has the life I want." The words felt like knives. "Emily, we're getting married in 3 weeks." She shrugged. "Not anymore." People at nearby tables had stopped eating. Everyone was watching. I could barely breathe. "I loved you." She sighed. "I know. But love doesn't pay for beach houses or private vacations." Then she picked up her purse. "I hope one day you'll understand." Without another word, she walked to Victor. He wrapped his arm around her. Together they walked out of the restaurant. I sat there frozen. The waitress quietly placed a glass of water beside me. I'm so sorry. I couldn't even answer. Outside the window, I watched Victor's luxury car disappear into traffic, taking the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with that I had no idea. The humiliation I felt that night was only the beginning. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily placing the engagement ring on the table that I kept asking myself the same question. The following Monday, I went back to work. I expected another ordinary day. Instead, my manager asked me to come into his office. Daniel, he said, smiling, we've been waiting for this. He placed a thick confidential folder on the desk. 6 months earlier, I had quietly helped develop a software system that a major technology company wanted to acquire. Because of the confidentiality agreement, I hadn't been allowed to tell anyone, not even Emily, that if the deal was approved, my life was about to change forever. And for the first time since the wedding was cancelled, I smiled. I stared at the confidential folder for several seconds before opening it. Inside was a contract with numbers I had to read 3 times just to believe they were real. The software I had spent nearly 2 years building after long nights and weekends had been selected for acquisition by one of the largest technology companies in the country. If everything went through, my share would be worth $8.70 million. I looked up at my manager, convinced there had to be a mistake, that he smiled. No mistake, Daniel. You earned this. For 6 months we've kept it confidential because of the legal agreement. If anyone leaked the deal before today, the entire acquisition could have collapsed. A month later, I received an invitation to a charity business gala. Normally, I would have said no. But my manager insisted. It's the perfect place to build new connections. So I rented a tuxedo, walked into the ballroom, and tried to enjoy the evening. Then, I heard a familiar voice behind me. Emily stood there, speechless. For the first time since she had walked away from me, she wasn't confident. She looked nervous. The woman standing beside me smiled politely. Daniel, are you coming? Give me 1 minute, I replied. She nodded and walked back inside the ballroom. Emily watched her leave. Is she your girlfriend? I smiled. No, she's a business partner. Emily let out a quiet sigh, almost relieved. I've missed you. Those 4 words would have broken me a few months earlier. Now, I felt nothing. I tried calling you, she continued. I even went to your old apartment. I wanted to explain. I looked at her calmly. Explain what? That you left me 3 weeks before our wedding? Or that you replaced me before the relationship was even over? She lowered her eyes. I made a terrible mistake. I didn't answer. For a moment, the silence between us said everything. Finally, she whispered. Victor wasn't who I thought he was. I wasn't surprised. What happened? She took a deep breath. He lied. He wasn't as rich as he claimed. Most of his businesses were drowning in debt. He only cared about appearances. He controlled everything I did. He even cheated on me. I listened without interrupting. Not because I cared, but because I wanted to hear the truth from her own mouth. Tears rolled down her face. I thought money would make me happy. I was wrong. I lost everything. I nodded slowly. No, Emily. You didn't lose everything. You gave it away. She started crying harder. I know I don't deserve another chance. But if there's even the smallest part of you that still loves me, please, can we start over? I reached into my wallet. From behind an old receipt. I didn't look back. As the ballroom doors closed behind me, the applause grew louder. For the first time in months, people weren't looking at me with pity. They were looking at me with respect. I stepped onto the stage, accepted the award for innovation, and thanked everyone who had believed in me when success was nothing more than an idea. When the ceremony ended, dozens of business owners introduced themselves. Some wanted to invest. Others offered partnerships. It felt unreal. Just a few months ago, I had been wondering how I would recover from a cancelled wedding. Now, my calendar was filled with opportunities one had never imagined. The next morning my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was unusually cheerful. Daniel, we saw you on the news. We're so proud of you. I stayed silent. The same parents who had told me Emily made the right choice were suddenly proud. My father took the phone. Son, why don't you come over this weekend? We should celebrate. I closed my eyes for a moment. Celebrate what? Your success, of course. I answered calmly. When I needed my family the most, you chose to believe I wasn't enough. There wasn't anything to celebrate back then. The line went quiet. I love you both, I said softly. But I haven't forgotten how alone I felt. Then I ended the call. A week later, I received another message. This time, it was from Emily. Can we please meet? Just once. I need to tell you something important. I ignored it. The next day, another message. I'm not asking for another chance. I just want to apologize properly. I ignored that one too. By the end of the week, she had sent 7 messages. Each one sounded more desperate than the last. Months earlier, I would have replied within seconds. Now, I didn't feel the need. One evening as I was leaving my office, I noticed someone sitting on a bench across the street. It was Emily. She stood up the moment she saw me. I've been waiting for 2 hours. I sighed. You shouldn't have. I just need 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We walked to a nearby park. She looked exhausted. The confident woman who once believed money could solve everything was gone. I've started therapy, she said quietly. I finally realized I kept chasing status instead of happiness. I nodded but said nothing. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I don't expect forgiveness. I only wanted you to know. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. I looked out across the lake. A few months ago, those words would have healed me. Now, they only reminded me how late they had arrived. I turned back to her. I truly hope you find peace, Emily. But that future, I paused, doesn't include me. She closed her eyes as tears rolled down her face. For the first time, she accepted the truth. Some doors don't close because of hate. They close because respect for yourself finally becomes stronger than loved. I walked away without looking back. And this time, she didn't follow. For the next few weeks, life was peaceful. My company continued to grow. I hired talented people who believed in hard work more than appearances. Every morning, I woke up excited about the future instead of haunted by the past. Then one Friday afternoon, my assistant walked into my office. Daniel, there's someone here asking for you. Who is it? She hesitated. It's Victor Harrison. I almost laughed. The man Emily had chosen over me was standing in my lobby. I told her to send him in. Victor looked nothing like the confident businessman I remembered. His expensive suits were gone. His shoulders were slumped. His eyes looked exhausted. He sat down without saying a word. Finally, he looked at me. I owe you an apology. I raised an eyebrow. For what? For everything. He took a deep breath. I lied to Emily. I wanted people to think I was richer than I really was. I borrowed luxury cars. I rented expensive houses. I was drowning in debt. I wasn't surprised. He continued. When my companies collapsed, everyone disappeared. Even Emily. I stayed silent. Then he said something I never expected. She actually loved you. I looked at him carefully. What? She loved you. But she loved the lifestyle she imagined even more. She believed money would solve every problem. And by the time she realized she was wrong, it was too late. Victor stood up. I'm leaving Chicago. I've sold everything. I just wanted you to know. You were never the loser. I was. He walked out of my office. I never saw him again. That evening, I received another phone call. This time, it was Emily's younger sister, Sophie. Her voice was shaking. Daniel. Emily's in the hospital. My heart skipped for a second. What happened? She collapsed at work. The doctors say it's severe stress. They also said she hasn't been eating properly for weeks. I closed my eyes despite everything. I never wanted her to suffer. Sophie spoke again. She keeps asking for you. Will you come? I looked out the office window at the city skyline. Months ago, I would have rushed there without thinking. Now, I wasn't sure if seeing her would help either of us. After a long silence, I picked up my car keys not because I wanted our relationship back, but because sometimes, the hardest thing isn't loving someone. It's saying goodbye the right way. The drive to the hospital felt longer than it really was. Not because of the traffic, but because every mile brought back memories I had spent months trying to forget. The road where we had laughed together. The coffee shop where we planned our honeymoon. The park where I had asked her to marry me. Those memories no longer hurt. They simply reminded me of someone who no longer existed. When I arrived at the hospital, Sophie was waiting near the entrance. She looked exhausted. "Thank you for coming." I nodded. "How is she?" "The doctors say she'll recover." "But emotionally?" Sophie looked down. "She blames herself for everything." She led me to Emily's room. Before opening the door, she quietly said, "She's been carrying your engagement ring in her purse every day." I froze. "The same ring?" Sophie nodded. "She never threw it away." I slowly walked inside. Emily looked pale. The confident woman who once chased luxury had completely disappeared. When she saw me, tears filled her eyes. "I didn't think you'd come." I pulled up a chair. "I'm here." For a few moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "I ruined everything." "I didn't argue," she continued. "I thought money would make me feel safe. But all it did was make me lose the one person who truly loved me." She reached into the bedside drawer. With trembling hands, she placed the engagement ring on the blanket between us. "I've carried this every day. I kept hoping I'd get the chance to give it back." She slowly pushed it toward me. "I know we can never be together again, but I don't want the last memory you have of me to be the woman who threw it away." I looked at the ring. For a second, I remembered the young man who had bought it with 6 months of savings. He believed love could survive anything. He was innocent, hopeful, and completely unaware of how much life could change. That I gently picked up the ring. Then, I placed it back into Emily's hand. "No." She looked confused. "It belongs to your past, not mine." Fresh tears rolled down her face. "I'm so sorry, Daniel." I smiled sadly. "I know. And I forgive you." She covered her face and began crying. Not because she expected another chance, but because forgiveness was something she never thought she deserved. I stood up. Before leaving, I looked back one last time. "I truly hope you find happiness someday." She nodded through her tears. "And I hope someone loves you the way you loved me." I quietly walked out of the room. Neither of us knew that would be the last time we would ever see each other. 3 months passed after that day at the hospital. Life moved forward in ways I never imagined. My company continued to grow. We expanded into 3 new cities. Every week brought another opportunity. But the biggest change wasn't in my career. It was inside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to prove my worth to anyone. I had finally learned that the right people never make you earn the love they freely give. One Saturday morning, I volunteered at a local youth technology program. I wanted to help teenagers who dreamed of becoming engineers, but couldn't afford expensive classes. That's where I met Olivia. She wasn't impressed by my success. In fact, she had no idea who I was. She simply smiled and asked, "So, are you the instructor everyone's talking about?" I laughed. "I guess so." Over the next few weeks, we worked together almost every weekend. She cared about people more than money. She listened more than she spoke. And for the first time since Emily, being around someone felt easy again. There were no games, no comparisons, no expectations, just honesty. One evening after class, Olivia asked, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "You wear a ring on a chain around your neck. Why?" I touched the silver chain under my shirt. The engagement ring. I had never thrown it away. Not because I still loved Emily, but because it reminded me of the lesson that changed my life. I smiled. It reminds me to never ignore red flags, and to never measure love by someone's bank account. Olivia nodded quietly. "I think that's a lesson a lot of people need." A few days later, I received an email from Sophie, Emily's younger sister. The subject line simply read, "I thought you should know." With a deep breath, I opened it. Inside was a short message. "Daniel, Emily has accepted a job overseas. She wanted a fresh start where nobody knows her past. Before she left, she asked me to tell you one thing. Tell Daniel he was the best man I ever knew." I just realized it too late. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then, I quietly closed the email. No anger, no satisfaction, just peace. Some stories don't end with revenge, they end with acceptance. I looked out of my office window as the sun began to set over Chicago. The past had finally stayed where it belonged, behind me, and for the first time, the future didn't feel uncertain. It felt exciting. 1 year later, I stood on the balcony of my new home, watching the sunrise over Lake Michigan. The city was waking up. Cars filled the streets. People hurried to work. Life kept moving forward, so had I. The software company I had helped build now employed more than 200 people. Every month we funded scholarships for students who couldn't afford college. The success I once dreamed about had finally arrived. Not because I chased money, but because I never stopped believing in my work. One afternoon, while speaking at a technology conference, a young man approached me. He looked nervous. "Mr. Parker, I just wanted to thank you." I smiled. "For what?" He held up his employee badge. "I almost quit programming because everyone told me I wasn't talented enough. Then I watched one of your interviews. You said something I'll never forget." I tried to remember. "What was it?" He smiled. "Never let someone else's opinion become your future." I laughed softly. I guess I needed to hear those words too. A few weeks later, I was cleaning an old storage box in my garage. Inside were wedding invitations, photographs, and a small framed picture of Emily and me. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I smiled. Not because I missed her, because I realized she was part of a chapter. Not the entire story. I quietly placed the photo back into the box, closed the lid, and donated it with the rest of the old memories. Some things aren't meant to be forgotten, but they're meant to teach us. That evening, Olivia and I walked along the lake. She slipped her hand into mine. "You've been quiet today." "I've been thinking about Emily."